Today we are meeting for exciting talk from Rachel Wins, who is this year's policy intern at ICER. We have policy interns from time to time, I think every semester, it's not every year. Right, every semester we have a policy intern, every year. It varies from time to time, but we have interns, undergraduate interns, who are often excellent in their fields and produce great work. And we've had a stellar record over the years. And Rachel, by all means, continues that tradition. As many of you know Rachel, she's worked on several projects through 4 years of her time here at UAA. And she'll share a little bit more about her personal background, where she's from, what she has done over the years, and more details about each project that she worked on at UAA. The central focus, which I hope will be the case for this presentation, is a project that she's been working on at ICER this semester. We teamed up to try and document an exciting story from one of our neighborhoods, our own neighborhoods in Anchorage. Shelley Hennessy, who joins us today, we're honored to have you here, was recently awarded the Community Hero Award by the legislature for her stellar contributions in getting a sewer project, a road project, essentially. A storm drain project. Mm-hmm. There are lots of components involved, and she worked tirelessly for 5 years, having had no experience organizing a community or dealing with municipal bureaucracy. But she worked through all those steps, lobbied the legislature, and got a $2.2 million grant from the legislature to get that done. It was a phenomenal effort, and I was very impressed when I first heard her, and you'll probably get to hear her little bits and pieces here and there trying to fill in the gaps that we might have left. But it's an ongoing project. We jumped into it thinking we could finish it in one semester and document the whole story, but it was very clear midway to us that we can only lay the foundation for what needs to be done. So Shelley, Rachel will share her story and many of her projects, including this storm drain project from Airport Heights. So there it is, it's all yours.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for coming this afternoon. So as most of you know, I'm graduating in a couple weeks here, and I wanted to kind of take an opportunity to look back over the past 4 years and kind of reflect on the major projects that I've done while at UAA. So when you first look at this array of projects, as you can see from the title, it may seem a bit haphazard because there's a lot of different kind of focus areas that I've looked into over the years. But the kind of major theme that I've focused on through my time is this issue of social justice. So as a sociology major, I've gone through a lot of somewhat depressing sociology classes, as I'm sure you'll agree, in that just kind of the more you learn about society, the more you realize that there's a lot of problems that need to be addressed. So the way that I've kind of combated this is through research. So I'll go through and give kind of a short overview of the major projects I worked on here at UAA, and I'll focus mostly on my project that I've been working here this semester at ICER, and then I'll leave some time at the end for questions and answers if you want to kind of ask some more specific questions about projects I've done. So the first project that I worked on holds a spot near and dear to my heart because it was kind of my first foray into the scholastic world. I built a philosophical argument that supported eradicating sarcasm from American society. And what started as a 5-page paper turned into a 16-page paper that I presented at the UAA Student Showcase. And I thought, 16 pages about one subject? How is that even possible? That's so many pages about one subject. And I thought that was gigantic, but I soon found out that it is possible to write much more about a subject. As many of the professors in the room have helped me do. So during this semester, I spent a lot of time in the library, and I basically went from class and took notes, and I went back to the library, and then I go to the next class, and then I do the reading for the class, and I do the same thing the next day. And this turned out to be really boring, and I didn't find that it was very meaningful. And I didn't want to kind of disappear from the world for 4 years while I was doing my college career and then appear 4 years later and say, oh, I got this piece of paper. And I really wanted to do something meaningful and kind of make a difference in the community with what I was learning and apply this to the community. So I heard the name UAA, Center for Community Engagement and Learning, and I thought, these guys will know how to get me engaged in the community. So I went and talked with Judy at the Center for Community Engagement and Learning, or CCEL, and they had this Engage Social Issues project that was going on, and I became an Engage liaison and looked into the issues of domestic violence and affordable housing and neighborhood development in Anchorage. So I gathered information about what was going on in these subject areas. So I talked to professors to see what kind of projects they were working on. I talked to student groups to see what they were doing with the issues. And I saw what kinds of agencies were working with these issues, and kind of brought all this information together to provide a platform for people to engage in the issue. We also put on Engage Week, which was a great opportunity for students to become engaged in these issues in their community. And through the center, they also offer a certificate in civic engagement. And this is 30 credits worth of classes that have a community focus. So I thought this would be really something important that could kind of use coursework to apply to the community and really apply my learning as I was going along. So in one of my classes called Community Inquiry and Action, I was in the first phase of starting a civic health initiative. And this initiative was an effort to measure and improve campus and community civic health. So what is civic health? Well, civic health refers to the magnitude of civic engagement in a community. And civic engagement essentially means working to make a difference in the civic life of our communities. So this is measured in 8 different indicator areas: political engagement, which is kind of voting, public work, which is public meeting attendance or working with neighbors to solve problems, volunteering and giving, participating in groups, engaging online, and having social trust, civic knowledge and agency, and being socially connected. So I put here some of my kind of favorite bits of data that we gathered throughout the project. And the first was voting turnout in Anchorage. And we're able to collect data about how many people show up to vote in different precincts, and we mapped this to see if there's any sort of spatial distribution to voting turnout. So the higher voting turnout areas we have marked here in yellow, and that's where there are at least 40% or more voting turnout in an area. And 40% voting turnout is actually really quite low if only 40% of the population there is voting. So we can see that this kind of brings to light the importance of doing a civic health initiative and trying to improve these areas. And then also the lower voting turnouts were areas that had voting turnouts of about 20% or less. So these are kind of like the downtown areas, Bernard. The higher areas tended to be kind of the south side of town. The second piece of information that we gathered also kind of holds a spot near and dear to my heart because I did an internship with the Municipality of Anchorage Long Range Planning Section and actually wrote up the report from a community council survey. And the survey was intended to kind of collect information about how the Long Range Planning Section was doing and if there's any areas that could be improved. And this question says, in general, how confident are you that your local government can solve the problems facing your community? And 7 community councils said they're not too confident that the local government can solve their problems. 6 community councils said they're somewhat confident, and none of them said that they were very confident that local government could solve their problems. So this is an issue, especially because the community council is the most basic form of government in the municipality of Anchorage. So if even the lowest form of government doesn't think that the government can solve problems, that means that we have some problems we need to work on here. So from here, I drastically shifted my focus to churches. And even though the focus was different, the emphasis was still the same. It was kind of this emphasis on community. And I investigated the question, does the church benefit its community? To see if there is any sort of community impact of the church outside of its 4 walls. And I chose Mountain View as a case study neighborhood. And I chose Mountain View because its geographical borders are really distinct, and it also has several kind of community issues that are really prevalent due to its lower socioeconomic status. And I interviewed the pastors of the churches in Mountain View. There are 12 churches there. I asked them what are some of the problems in the community, and they gave me this gigantic list that included things about poverty, so lack of food and childcare, homelessness, kind of issues with the family, different racial groups aren't getting to know each other, and then a whole slew of kind of crime-related issues in the community. Then I asked them what are some of the activities or services that you offer at your church. And some of them offered classes on various topics. They had food banks and would serve meals on Sundays. They'd have giveaways of clothing or furniture. They would help out people in their congregation. They let other groups use their facilities. They taught positive values. And they offered counseling, comfort, compassion, and love. So from these services, I concluded that they addressed a variety of the social problems in their community. So the primary one was the lack of food. A lot of the churches had food pantries that were available for people, and also had potlucks or things on Sundays or sometimes on Wednesday services. And this indirectly kind of affected the issue of poverty. So people could spend their money on bills instead of buying food. They also offered activities for children to do and had good role models in the church, and also addressed this issue of loss of hope for people by offering them another kind of sense of hope. They partially addressed several other problems relating to children's education, employment, and racial differences. And I say they partially addressed these because only 1 or 2 churches would have programs that kind of attended to these needs. And then as far as issues of crime go, mostly the churches just discouraged those problems rather than addressing them directly. And then they didn't address the issues of reliance on social help or homelessness. But with all this, I concluded that there are some concrete benefits of the church by offering activities, by having food, and by teaching positive moral values and offering comfort, compassion, and love, which are just kind of intangible benefits that aren't really offered by other institutions. Mm-hmm.
Did you either ask them or collect any data otherwise about how many people participate in these programs and whether they attract people from other than their congregation? Because it's very easy to say we do all these well-intended things, but to really know if they make a difference, you need to understand something about who uses them as well as
And that was one thing I thought about too. I think some of the churches did keep track of how many families used their food pantry services, though I'm not sure if they tracked whether they were in the congregation or not. And another thing I thought of too was that if the church was just helping people within the church, are they still making a difference in the community? And it seems that, people who go to the church are also members of the community. So if they are focusing on people in their church, then that does kind of affect the wider community as a whole as well.
You need to know something about numbers of. I would hypothesize that probably more people show up for food because that's more basic than might be for some of the others. But anyway, and also whether there's duplication or whether they're each serving their own niche or whether some of these projects could be more widely
shared. That was another issue that I was talking about with Mao Tosi. He does a lot of work with the Polynesian community in East Anchorage, and he was saying that the Polynesian churches, so there's 5 Polynesian churches in Mountain View, and he was saying a lot of times if they kind of have a point of contention, they'll just break off and do their own thing. And so they're not unified, so they can't get any sort of funding for their tribe, I guess you would call it. And he was saying that they should do exactly that, is kind of split up. One person would do job references, another person or church would do food. But there's kind of this disunity in that community. So in the fall of 2011, I met Susan Bomalaski, who's the executive director of Catholic Social Services. And Catholic Social Services runs Brother Francis Shelter, which is a homeless shelter here in Anchorage. And she mentioned to me that there's this tension between the residents in Fairview and the social service agencies that are located there. The residents don't want the social service agencies there because they think that they're bringing in the homeless people who are, loitering in the neighborhood or panhandling or things like that. But then on the other hand, the social service agencies are offering these services that are much needed. So this tension has kind of built up over the years, and she believed that it kind of comes from a lack of understanding between these two groups. So I conducted a study that collected information about the daily life of the clients of the social service agencies. And this was to kind of paint a picture of what it is that the people who use the services do throughout the day, so that the residents of the neighborhood could stop, basing the judgments off of assumptions and kind of start having productive conversation around this issue and around addressing the issue of homelessness in the community. So at the end, I surveyed 179 clients of the 5 main social service agencies in Fairview. And I utilized this stratified cluster sampling technique, which means that in the agencies that had more clients, so Brother Francis Shelter and Beans Cafe, I sampled more clients from those places rather than the 3 additional other ones. I also did surveys in 3 waves. So I did surveys in July, in September, and in November. And this was to account for any sort of seasonal differences in daily activities. So the main question that I asked people was, what do you do on a typical day? And I got back a wide variety of responses that I further categorized into kind of stereotypically productive activities and stereotypically kind of unproductive activities. So as far as productive activities go, the vast majority of people, about 63 people, said they volunteer. A lot of people will volunteer at Beans Cafe before or after having lunch. Another 44 people said they do chores. 40 people work during the day. Another 40 people do job search. Some people have medical appointments throughout the day. Others said they help other people or look for education.
I just briefly, the sample of people, these 184 people, you said they're clients of social service agencies. Can you tell us approximately what share are the clients of Beans, are the clients of alcohol treatment programs? Who are they? Can you tell us?
So about 91% of the people that I surveyed were homeless.
Homeless people in general. Okay.
And then about 70% of the people were male, 30% were female. Most of the people were in the age range from about 40 to 59 years old. And then about 45% of the people were Native Alaskan.
And how did you find them?
I went to the social service agency and did the surveys there. So just whoever was there during the day, if they wanted to participate in the survey, then they could. And as far as these kind of stereotypical unproductive activities, the majority of people said that they kind of hang out, either at Beans or around town. 39 people said they kind of wander around throughout the day. 27 people mentioned alcohol use. 3 people mentioned using drugs. 10 people specifically mentioned not working. 7 people have mentioned just recently getting out of prison. About 6 people said that they panhandle, and 4 people said that they try to avoid the Anchorage Safety Center. So these kind of more unproductive activities are the ones we kind of see the most. We see people just hanging out, on the side of the road or whatever. We see people panhandle. But panhandling, so it only accounts for, 6 people responded that they panhandle, and that's only about 3% of the sample. So these things that immediately come to mind are things that kind of build a negative stereotype for us, but it's not actually as prevalent as we might think.
Yeah. One choice, because I can imagine a person could say, well, I do several of those things.
So what I did, it was
I wander around.
And several people did have, several people did have multiple responses in this area, but what it was a kind of a qualitative survey. So I just asked them to just describe what they do throughout the day. And it was, exactly. So it was a free, and then I went through and coded all the responses.
Okay, but that kind of, that methodology could kind of misrepresent. You could find that there's a much higher percent who sometimes panhandle, but they just didn't mention that.
Yeah. And
or something else, but.
Yeah. And there were some people where I interviewed and I'd say, okay, so what do you do during the day? And they go, oh, well, I go to the soup kitchen. And I was like, okay, and and So I had to really kind of pull it out of them, and it seemed like there were some gaps in their day. But then a lot of other people were really kind of open about what they did during the day, and just were really glad to have someone to talk to about. Yes?
Do you have any statistics on the number of homeless people in Anchorage? I mean, so I think that would put light onto what you're talking about here in terms of trying to reach a decision of, well, this is how we view people. But I mean, what the sample size seems probably pretty small, if I'm not mistaken. Do you have any figures on that?
As far as, I'm trying to think back of when I did this study, and the exact number is not coming to mind, and so I don't want to throw something out and get you off course.
But Daryl has to just say 2,000.
2,000, okay. Thank you.
3,800.
Okay, 2,000 to 3,000. And the study that I did wasn't specifically targeting the homeless population. It was kind of looking at the social service agencies in particular and the amount of people that they serve throughout the day. But it was a majority of the response was from homeless people. So next I asked people, what are some of the goals you have? So I asked them, is there anything you want to be doing differently on a typical day 6 weeks from now? And 80 people mentioned that they wanted to be working. 60 people wanted to be in housing. So people wanted to move to a different place or have a different lifestyle. They wanted to be sober, be financially secure, pursue education, get their Social Security paperwork in line, get treatment for either drugs or alcohol, get job training, or get together with their family. So these are goals that I think we all kind of share. Like, we want to have housing, we want to have a job. During all the interviews that I did, I talked to one person who said that he actually wanted to be homeless, and he chose to be. But all the other people I interviewed didn't really want to be there. They wanted to be doing something different. So this really is a big community problem that we should really look into addressing. And some kind of recommendations I had that came out of this study were to start with kind of a mentorship program, to build relationships between people who their social networks are all in this kind of like homeless population. They don't have stable people to talk to even like bounce an idea off of or just kind of unload. Offering classes that would develop skills or hobbies for people to be more productive. Also kind of acting as liaisons for employment. A lot of people would volunteer at Beans for hours and hours each week, but it was never recorded, so it didn't really seem like they were doing anything. And then a final recommendation is just to come together around the issue, because there's no one single way to solve the issue of homelessness. It's going to require a bigger net. So, the schools need to be on in it, the researchers need to be on it, the social service agencies, and the entire, all the people in the community needs to be in on kind of addressing this issue. So I also received another undergraduate research grant from the UAA Honors College. And this was to look into the issue of food insecurity. And food insecurity is the state of either having limited or uncertain access to food that is nutritionally adequate, culturally acceptable and safe, or having an uncertain ability to acquire acceptable foods in socially acceptable ways. So we surveyed 454 UAA students, which is about 4.8% of the student population. And we sampled the students from GER, or General Education Requirement courses, and from capstone courses. And we chose these classes because this would give us a representative sample of the students at UAA, because all the students have to take these classes. So we randomly selected GER and capstone classes until we got about 450 students. So the first question we asked regarding food insecurity was, how often do you find yourself without a sufficient amount of food? And about 70% of the students responded that they always have enough food. About 17% said about once or twice a month they don't have enough food. 5% said once a week they don't have enough food. Another 5% said multiple times a week they don't have enough food. And then 3% said that they daily do not have enough food. And so this top 3 categories here are where it gets kind of scary, where at least once a week to daily they don't have enough food. And that's about 13% of the students at UAA. The next question was, how often do you find yourself without nutritionally adequate food? And for these, the numbers go up in these top 3 categories. So once a week was about 13% of the students. 14% of the students didn't have nutritionally adequate food multiple times a week, and then 3% didn't have it daily. So again, that's about 30% of the students that at least once a week don't have nutritionally adequate food. Now, how often do you depend on free food for your food security? Again, this is about 12% of the students depend on free food for the food security at least once a week. So what we did from here is we assigned a value to each student's response. So if they responded that they never had any food insecurity, we give them a value of 0. If they responded once or twice a month, they got a score of 1, score of 2, 3, and 4. So the higher the score, the more food insecure the person is.
So just to make sure I understand that, you're saying that of all those 100 plus mostly homeless people that you entered, a good half said they never rely on free food.
So this is a change of topic.
I'm sorry.
I'm going too fast.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is students at UAA.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. So from here, we kind of mapped all the students' responses and gave each a food insecurity value kind of score, and this is what we got. So about a third of the students are completely food secure. 42% are slightly food insecure, so maybe once or twice a month they go without nutritionally adequate food. But then getting to moderately food insecure, this is about 21% of the students. So this could be maybe a couple times a week they don't have nutritionally adequate food, or a couple times a week they have to depend on free food for their food insecurity. In the next category, we have very food insecure. That's about 6% of the students. So this could be someone who finds themselves without enough food multiple times a week. They don't have nutritionally adequate food, and they have to depend on free food multiple times a week. And then maybe they also have to use student loan money to get their food. And then the last category is extremely food insecure, and this is about 4% of students. And this is a student who maybe daily doesn't have nutritionally adequate food and daily has to get free food for their food insecurity. Maybe multiple times a week they don't have enough food. Maybe they're using food stamps. They might have to resort to shoplifting in order to make things meet. And they're using student loan money to buy their food. So this is, again, these top 3 categories is where it gets kind of scary, in that they really have kind of a noticeable food insecurity, and that's about 31% of the student population that we surveyed. So our recommendations coming out of this is that we start a conversation around this issue of food insecurity at UAA, both with administrators and in the student population, and kind of determine which food programs would be most effective in addressing student food insecurity. Yes.
Did students know about the resources on campus, like the emergencies and cash and stuff like that?
Some of them did. I think about 14% said that they use the Daily Den. I don't think a lot of them knew about the Student Health Center food resources. But yeah. So this brings us to the present. So for the fall 2013 semester, I was awarded the ICER Policy Research Award to work on a research project here at the Institute of Social and Economic Research. So for this internship, I worked with Diwakar Vadapalli to document a successful community organizing effort of the Alexander Avenue residents in achieving their goal of getting a $2.5 million grant from the Municipality of Anchorage and the State of Alaska to redo the storm drain system underneath the road. So I worked to kind of create a timeline of this process and went through about 639 emails and 3 gigantic folders of documents to document this process. And I applied this to an advocacy framework. There were 3 different kinds of advocacy that were used in this project. One is community advocacy, which is about changing community ideas and attitudes around an issue. Another is agency advocacy, which endeavors to bring change in programs and agencies. And then legislative agency, which promotes and influences legislation. And then a fourth component to this is doing your advocacy homework. And this happens on an individual level where you're researching to kind of find out where you can apply these different advocacy techniques. So here's a sneak peek at the timeline, and I wanted to explain to you really quick about the color coding, what I've done. So these green boxes are the individual kind of doing your advocacy homework phase. The purple boxes are legislative advocacy phases. The red is agency advocacy. And then the blue outline that you see on some of these boxes is community advocacy. And community advocacy always has to work in concert with other types of advocacy, because what you're doing is bringing the community together to make change in an agency or in the legislative bodies. So the story starts out when Shelley Hennessy identified a problem with her house. So she moved into her house in October 2005, and she found that the sump pumps in her crawl space were running constantly. And the sump pump is essentially a suction pump that sucks the water out of an area and pushes it out into either the storm drain or the sewage drain, as we found in this case. And this is bad. This is a problem. This is what one of the crawl spaces looked like on Alexander Avenue, and you can see it's just filled with water, and that is a problem. That is not good.
What part of town?
It's in East Anchorage, so it's off Burgaw. So seeing this problem, Shelley started to work with her condo association. So the East Thunderbird Condo Association, or ETCA as I have it written here, has 33 units in it, which are on Alexander Avenue and then on a street adjacent to it. And 22 of those units were on Alexander Avenue, mostly on the south side. Then on the north side were kind of single-family homes, people that owned their own homes that were also affected by this issue. But she didn't know that initially. She was just working with the condo association to kind of, maintain the sump pumps or jet the lines. Sometimes they would clog. But then she'd kind of had enough with this. And she started asking questions and collecting some information. She started talking to her neighbors, and she found out that there were problems just like hers in the other houses around her. She found out that there was a history of this problem. So years before, the road had started to actually come up in the middle, and on the bottom, it kind of sunk down, and there'd be water collecting in these puddles along the side of the road the entire year, just standing water. There was a sinkhole that cropped up one year, and the municipality came through and filled it up and then took off and didn't do anything about it. Also, the mailboxes started falling over, and the post office had to come in and relocate the mailboxes to another spot because this problem was so huge. And what she eventually found out is that there's a really high water table in this area. And when the development was built in 1972, they were supposed to put in a curtain underground that collected all the water and put it down into a storm drain. But they didn't put the curtain in. And the municipality checked off on this and said that it was okay. So this initial problem back in 1972 was creating all this mess in 2005. So she'd also had worked as a property manager and knew that it would be necessary to have some documentation about the project. So the East Thunderbird Condo Association paid to have an engineering study done, so they'd have professional opinion on what was going on with the problem. They also took pictures of the problem to kind of show this is what's going on. They found out also which department within the municipality of Anchorage would have jurisdiction over the problem, and they looked into which kind of political figures would have some influence over this as well. So in March of 2008, they decided to take some action. They'd had enough. With the support of her condo association, they formed the East Thunderbird Condo Association Action Committee. And this was an action committee that was formed around this issue to try and resolve it. They also contacted the Municipality of Anchorage Project Management and Engineering Department, so PM&E. And they talked to the guy who had influence over this issue. And the guy said, well, yeah, I mean, technically we have influence over the issue, but we don't really have funding, and we can't really do anything unless the assembly tells us to do it. So he said, you have to talk to your community council. So they went to the Airport Heights Community Council, and they presented about the issue. And after they presented about this issue, you know, the road is heaving, the mailboxes are falling over. They actually had sewage that was backed up into their house multiple times because the lines going out would clog, and then the sewage would just back up into their house. So it was just a terrible health problem all around. And so after giving this presentation to the community council and looking at the faces of the people in the audience that were just completely aghast, they thought, okay, we've got something here. Something is going to happen. And so the Airport Heights Community Council put this project on their priority list for a capital improvements project. And they named it as their first priority, as a project they wanted to get figured out. And around this time as well, Shelley met with L.V. Gray Jackson, who's one of the assembly members in Anchorage. And she talked to Shelley and said, Shelley, are you serious about seeing this problem through? Are you serious about getting this fixed? And she said, yes, I absolutely am. This needs to change. And L.V. said, okay, I'll help you get there. And this was a really crucial point in this project, in that L.V. had a lot of connections with the Municipality of Anchorage and with the state, because she'd worked there for so many years. And she knew all the people who needed to be contacted to get the issue taken care of. And she knew the process that the project had to go through in order to get funded and happen. So the Airport Heights Community Council sent their priority list to the Assembly and said, we want this project to be funded. And this is where the community had to get involved. They had to come together because the Assembly was then going to rank their projects, because all the community councils give their project lists to the Assembly. So the community had to come to the public hearings at the Assembly and testify and say, this is the problem that we're having. This is how bad it was, or it is, and try and get them to put it on their project list to be funded. So the Assembly did end up putting it on their project list as the 27th priority, and they sent this project list to the state for funding. Now, in the state that year, it had been an absolutely terrible year financially. This is right when the recession had hit. And a lot of the rural areas were so impoverished that they couldn't buy food, they couldn't buy gas to heat their houses. So a lot of the money that year went to these rural areas, and their project did not get funded. So at this point, they had to kind of start over again. They came back to the Municipality of Anchorage and said, what are our funding options? What can we do? And they suggested that they do an RID. An RID stands for Road Improvement District. And this is a funding option where the Municipality of Anchorage will pay for 90% of the project cost, and the citizens who live on the street will pay for 10% of the project. So at this point, they had to get the community involved again. They had to have at least 50% of the people who lived on the road agree to pay this 10%. So Shelley went out and knocked on doors and called people and sent emails to let them know what was going on and tell them about the whole process. And she told them that we have to agree to pay this 10%, but what we want to do is get the state to fund the extra 10% so that we don't have to pay anything at all. Yes?
At this point, I believe about a bunch of houses didn't have the problem, so they had to be convinced. Is that true?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so some of the houses were having these problems with their foundation and having the water leak into their crawl spaces. But another portion of the houses didn't have the problem, but the problem was slowly making its way toward them. So the water that was running underground was getting into the houses kind of at the top of the hill, and it was slowly eroding the kind of the underground creek that it was building and it would eventually get to these other houses. But since the owners didn't have these problems now, they were saying, well, why should I pay for something that isn't my problem? But they finally succeeded in getting at least 50% of the people to sign up and say that they will pay for this, in the hopes that the state would fund the other 10%. So first of all, they had to get it on the bond. So the ARDSA bond is the Anchorage Road and Drainage Service Area bond, which takes care of roads and drainage projects in the Anchorage area. So they had to add an amendment to this bond to get their project on it to be funded. And of course, this came up with another round of public hearings, and they had to testify. They had to bring all their community together. One thing that they'd do is that they'd get all the neighbors to come and attend this public hearing. And then Shelley, or a representative of the community council or a representative of the action committee, would stand up and make a presentation. And they'd tell them about the issue. And then they'd say, and these are all the people that are affected by the issue. And they'd have everyone stand up. And a lot of times it was, a third of the room or half the room would stand up, and the assembly would just see that these are all the people affected by this issue. And they're really important, really trying to get this issue resolved. So it's a really important thing that should be funded. So they put it on the ARDSA bond. But this is a bond that went out to the entire municipality of Anchorage to be voted on in the April election. However, in February, the legislative sessions began again in Juneau. So they had to lobby the state legislator to try and get this project funded at the state level to get the other 10% of the funds. So Shelley, along with L.B. Gray Jackson, went down to Juneau and met with legislators and tried to kind of explain to them the situation. And this is where the community advocacy kind of phase comes into play again. A lot of the legislators think that Anchorage citizens are really spoiled because we get to live in an urban area and we have a lot of the infrastructure already in place, and the rural parts of Alaska a lot of times don't get the funding or have it worse off. So they try and get funds to go to the rural areas more. So they had to really change the legislators' minds on these issues. They had to tell them how bad it was and that it really needs to be funded. So a lot of people from the community sent in letters. The community council would send in a letter of support, and they were just lobbying really hard to kind of display the importance of the issue and that it should be funded. So then they came back to Anchorage and they riled up the troops again to vote on the ARDSA bond, and it was passed. So they got the 90% funding for their project. But in June, the project funds in the state were vetoed by the governor. It made it all the way up. It made it through the finance committee and onto the governor's bill. And since it was another hard financial year, it was struck right off, and they didn't get funds for the project. But they moved forward with the RID process anyway and started working on construction plans. But they wanted to get this last 10% funded by the state. So they had to go through the process again of telling the assembly to put it on their priority list to send to the state. And again, another round of public testimony and public hearings that the community was all part of. They sent letters, they testified at meetings, they called their legislators to try and remind them again of the importance of the issue. And then in February, again, it went to the state legislature, and Shelley, along with L.B. Gray Jackson, went and lobbied in person. They had the whole community send letters to try and get it funded. And it was funded. They were successful. And, and the project began just a couple months later. And so the entire process took from October of 2005 to July of 2012, about 7 years. But it's just an absolutely amazing example of what community organizing can do in achieving a goal. And it's really just kind of a model of persistence and efficacy in community advocacy. So this is what I worked on this semester as an ICER Policy Research Award recipient. So from here, where do I go? Well, in about, oh, I just ended it. That's terrible. Where do we go? We go to trying to fix this. Where's the tech guy? Okay, I made it really far without screwing it up. That's pretty good. So from here, graduation. I graduate in about 3 weeks, and I'm ready to get some more international experience under my belt. I'll be going to Columbia at the beginning of January to teach English, and hopefully down the line get some international research experience in, and potentially a master's in public policy as well. So I want to kind of wrap up by thanking all of you for coming, and also thanking the people who have helped me throughout my 4 years here at UAA. So first on the list, of course, Mom and Dad and my lovely sister. You guys are amazing in encouraging me to do all the crazy things that I want to do. The Center for Community Engagement and Learning, oh my goodness, without the Engage Social Issues project, I don't even know where I would be. I would probably be in California incurring thousands and thousands of dollars of debt. But you guys were just so instrumental in just developing me as a student and as a citizen and as a person. The sociology department, of course, oh my goodness. You guys are amazing in just helping me on all my research questions and issues, and just mentoring me through the research project process. The Spanish department, Patricia Fagan couldn't be here today, sadly, but the Spanish department on campus is amazing. If ever you have any inclination to learn a language, I suggest it, and I just honestly wouldn't have stepped my foot out of this country without their help. Student life and leadership, Jess, you're so amazing and you're so positive and encouraging all the time and helping me with all my Spanish club and sociology club stuff. And of course, the UAA Honors College. You guys have funded 2 giant projects that I did, and the ICER internship here, and that is just like such a great help. I wouldn't have been able to do these projects without the funds from the Honors College, so thank you. And last but not least, to ICER, Gunnar, thank you for having me here, and Diwakar, thank you so much for helping me through this project this semester, and you are always just a really encouraging kind of influence on community engaged research and stuff. So that's all my thank yous. I'm sure I've left a lot of people out, but I'd like to, we have about 5-10 minutes that we can open up for questions, and yeah. Yes.
First, thank you for just a wonderful and inspiring presentation. My question for you is, what's your advice for other students?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've done all these amazing and interesting research projects, so based on all this, what's your advice?
Yeah, I think kind of following after the things that they find interesting. I mean, for me, initially, I was really bored by just sitting in class and taking notes. And when something kind of came along that I thought was interesting, or just looking more into it, just having that curiosity. A lot of the things that I did came out of connections that I had. So being involved, especially with engaged social issues, I'd hear about an issue, and then I kind of found out about the tools that were available to help me kind of address those, like funds from the Honors College. If I didn't have that kind of framework to work in, I wouldn't have really been able to succeed. So as far as advice, my goodness, just looking for opportunities and being ready to take them and go with them. A lot of the things too, I was able to make count for things. So as I was doing the research projects, I got academic credit for doing them. So I would do them in association with a sociology practicum. So being able to kind of double dip in things was nice. Yes.
I just want to tell you how impressed I am, and I want to tell you also, I wish I had started what you're doing 25 years ago. I shudder to think where I might be today, and to see you at the threshold of so much to come is very, very exciting. I'm excited for you. I wanted to make just a couple comments about just the whole range of things that I had no idea that you were also researching. And as a person who also, thank you for representing our group and me so well. The other subjects that you were going over with the church community and their involvement, I also am very involved in my church and it is involvement with its community. And I so hope that you'll continue with that education, because churches grow over the course of time, just like the community does, and learning what they can do to help their community. With the health information and the food thing, I don't know if you knew this, but I also work for the Census Bureau for the Center for Disease Control. I do the National Health Information Survey. It is absolutely amazing what you find out about the food situation, about people. I think your numbers are right on. And I it's another cause close to my heart. And all of these subjects they're just all interconnected. And I'm just so excited to see you in doing what you're doing, because you have to look at how everything is connected in your community. So
Yeah,
I'm very impressed.
thank you.
You're awesome.
Yes.
Thank you, and I think Gunner's question was, it's very impressive what you've done and your initiative to look for opportunities as well as ones that can be useful elsewhere. And I was just going to say, I hope after your experience in Columbia or where else, you might consider, you'll take the opportunity eventually to get a little involved wherever you end up in some development activity, and that perhaps you'll think about a career or some ongoing education in international development, because much of what you've learned here is very relevant in this context, and that's certainly a place where you could apply your interests and growing aptitudes, but you might also find that developing country work is something that will intrigue you as well. But congratulations on taking so much initiative and all people that have helped you.
Thank you. Yes.
Excellent presentation. Thank you so much for doing that. I'm wondering if you can reflect on lessons learned for you personally from studying Shelley's experience and the entire project in particular, and your experience doing research at UAA.
Yeah, I think from doing this Alexander Avenue storm drain project, I learned a lot about the political process, things that I would never know. I think maybe kind of the ordinary citizen, I think maybe you experienced this when you started the project, was that you don't really know what's out there, what you can do. And so sometimes we feel, and I think I felt this too, is that you feel kind of powerless in society, because I mean there's so many things that are going on that are so much bigger than you, and you think you're just this little dot, and what can you do? But I've found through doing research is that I could look into these issues, I could produce something that would make a change. I think that's kind of the biggest thing I've learned from doing research. And I've really enjoyed that. It's really kind of applied what I've been learning. You learn these things in books, and it's this pretty, and A leads to B, and that goes to C. But it's like the real world is a lot messier than that. And kind of sorting through that and finding my way through that has been really great. Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah.
Did you know that the municipality, after this whole storm drain project thing, was also trying to figure out how to put on the municipal website some sort of education and mapping on how to do something like this. You would think after all this time, somebody would have thought that maybe there was a click you could go on how do we do this. But there wasn't, and you've diagrammed it, Rachel. You really need to go help them out.
Okay. All right.
Well, really, I mean, go talk to them.
You have time between December and January.
Put it on the to-do list.
I mean, seriously, that's what you have there is you've done the work for them that they didn't seem to have to.
And just so you know, Shelley, this is not the end of the project. She really laid the foundation for it. We didn't know how deep this was going to be until we got involved.
Neither did I.
7 years later. So she really laid the foundation, and I'm sure somebody else will join me in continuing the effort.
Yeah.
So a big thank you to Rachel for
Yes.
doing all the work.
Yes, very much so, Rachel.
Just on that, isn't it the case that every community organizing project or even bigger statewide issue, they're sort of all the same, but they're also all different?
Yeah.
And it's more principles like you're
Like, don't give up.
well, like,
Yeah.
yeah, like it's gonna there are gonna be setbacks. Like you have to talk to the neighbors, and there's a lot of door to door. There's a lot of personal
If I
stuff.
had any clue in the beginning, I probably would have ran like a check. I mean, you don't just, I thought you just really don't know what you're getting into. But the cause becomes your motivation, your neighbors, the love of your neighbors. When you get to know people and you see how everyone's being affected.
You wouldn't have written it though as, how I'd like to spend the next 8 years of my life.
And this the story resonates with me over many similar things I've seen, and I think a really interesting thing would be to, not that you have time for it, but maybe 5 other students to do 5 of these studies, and then talk about what were common to all of them, and draw those pictures, what were common, and then there are some sort of broader parallel things that come across all of them, relating to the kinds of things that were just being said just here.
And what Rachel just said, what she learned, what this small little dot can do. You have no, to help people understand what a small little dot can do over time and persistence and caring. That lesson, I sat back in amazement, just going. And then when I see this, I go, I still drop my jaw. What can people do when they get together is amazing.
Just to follow up on Gunnar's comment, this project started as something similar to what Gunnar said, wanting to document a bunch of community hero stories from Anchorage. As I was teaching community organizing course in social work department, I wanted local examples. And Shelley was the first community hero I met in Anchorage in terms of community organizing. And I met a few others later on. And so that's how this started. And the first story itself is so extensive. It takes a lot of work to really get a good story together. So it'll continue on. And Rachel started it, and we'll keep the flame going. So thank you so much for coming and participating in the talk. Good luck, Rachel. And let's formally end the talk so we can all socialize.
Yes, thank you for coming.